Tree and this is Stitchless TV. Today I'm going to show you how to make this 3D cup mask that has 3 layers, including a filter pocket, nose wire, ties, adjustable ties to go around your ears or your head. But our mask is made out of an embroidered table runner. Now I've been making a lot of face masks recently, or face coverings, and I have found that this is the best way to make them. Now you can get the free mask pattern from Vetigraph Fashion Solutions. You just print it off on your printer. Now I found that I prefer my masks to be a bit narrower here, where it gets folded back and goes around the ear. Okay, so their mask finishes here and I've just curved it up just like this. You need to cut out 2 pieces in your outer fabric, 2 pieces in the lining, and then another 2 pieces in the lining, and we're going to cut that one a bit smaller because that becomes the filter pocket. Now for the outer fabric that I'm using today, I'm using one of these vintage embroidered table runners. Now the other thing that you need is some sort of wire that will become the nose wire. You also need some elastic, and depending upon whether you're going to do it so it just goes around the ears or around the head, that will determine how much you need. So the first thing that you need to do, so you've got your outer fabric, you've got your main lining fabric, and then you've got another lining fabric, okay, and you have 2 of each of these. Now because this is going to become where we put the filter in, we need to cut off 6 centimetres, 5 centimetres, because when it goes inside the mask we need to be able to get in there. So this is the curved bit that is the front, that's the top of the mask, and that's the bottom of the mask. So the first thing that we're going to do is sew all of our curves on the front of our mask. So we're going to start with the lining. So I want you to go forwards and back. We've started at the top of the nose on the curve on the front of the mask. Now no pulling or anything. Remember, I'm doing a smaller seam allowance than they say. They say 1 centimetre, I'm doing 1/2 centimetre. And you can just use the width of your sewing foot there. So backwards and forwards at the end. So you will end up with that. Now the next thing that we need to do is, so this is going to be the filter pocket that will be inside the mask. And then we need to hem the bits on the side. So you've got to fold back a small hem and then fold back another hem. And it's a good idea to press that so that it's ready to sew. So I know it's a bit bright with the white light. So this is the wrong side of the fabric. I've created a hem, I've pressed it, well I haven't, I finger scored it. So now we're just going to sew that into place. So it looks like that. Now as you do these masks, every now and again you get confused about what's the top and the bottom. So keep referring back to your pattern or the piece where you know is the right way round. So you've done this. So you've stitched around there, that's the top. You've hemmed it. So you end up with that. And check what's the top and the bottom against the pattern or one of your pieces. Okay, so you can press that. You can snip into this curve, but it's not really necessary at the moment. So now I'm going to work on the other lining piece, and I just need to sew around this curve here. So we always go forwards and backwards to close off the seam at the beginning, and we do that at the end. So I've done that, and I'm just going to snip into the curve because this lining's, oh, my scissors are not great. This lining, so we've got our two linings done. This is going to end up sitting inside like that. Now before we start sewing up the outer fabric, I want to create a channel for the wire, and I do that now. So depending upon how wide, how thick your wire is, does depend how big a channel you do, but most wire is going to be more or less like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is just bend the end of my wire. Now with your seam allowances, I'd push one way on the lining, and then the lining of your filter pocket push the other way, so you distribute that weight, or rather so you distribute the thickness. Now where we're going to be sewing, I'll point with the wire. So we're on the top of the mask now. Now I am going to sew a centimetre seam allowance because I need it. I'm going to sew a centimetre seam allowance coming along the top, going there and stopping there. So look, I'm a centimetre seam allowance, maybe even a tiny bit bigger, centimetre seam allowance from the top of the mask, yeah, from the edge of your fabric. Have your needles, pins rather, have your pins going in this way. Don't do it that way. This, I don't know why people do that. Right, so you go forwards and back at the edge, stay the same distance, just go slowly and carefully if you find it difficult, same distance away from the edge. Make sure that you pushed the seam allowance of one lining that way and the seam allowance of the other lining that way to spread the bulk, otherwise you end up with a great big lump. And before you get to your needles, you pull them out. And then when we get here, we're going to go forwards and back again. We've done a centimetre seam allowance, yeah? Now we're going to come in again and we're going to sew, so we end up with a channel that is about half a centimetre, so we can easily pass that wire through it. So I'm starting where I started before, but a little bit away from that stitch line. I'm going to go forwards and back again. And forwards and back at the end. So look, can you see what we've ended up with? We've got like a channel there. So that's the reverse side. And that's the right side. So then what I can do is, once I've measured out how long I need the wire to be, and I've folded back the ends, you may not need to do this, you might have bought the special aluminium nose wire, you then need to pass it through. Now it's easier to pass it through if you go in the direction of where your seam allowance goes that way. So have I done that? Yeah, I have. You. So I'm just passing it through. So it should be a bit shorter. Do you see that? It should be a little bit shorter than the end, because really you can stay stitch it there and there. I'm not doing that at the moment though. So before we finish with the lining bits for now, you also need to attach it at the bottom. So put your pins in vertically like that, and then just sew a seam allowance away. You decide what it is, but stick to it. Centimetre, half a centimetre. And then that will hold everything in place. I would also pay attention to however you've pushed your seam allowance at the top, do the same at the bottom. So I've got one going that way and one going this way. That's our lining and our filter pocket. That's complete with the nose wire. So now let's sew the outer parts together. Remember, do keep track of what's the top and what's the bottom. You could put a little notch there. So I've put the pattern underneath so I can keep an eye on it. So this is my top and this is the front curve that will go over the nose. So you're just going to sew a seam allowance away, come around here like you did on all of the linings actually. But remember, because I'm using this beautiful pattern and I'm trying not to disturb it, I can either do it so that I just sew a seam allowance and go off into nothing like a dart there, and then the same at the bottom, or I can sew a seam allowance away and then just a tiny seam allowance and come down here so that I hardly disturb the pattern at all. It is important that you use the same seam allowance as you did use on your lining when you start and when you finish, otherwise they're really not going to line up. So forwards and back, exactly the same as before, and then you do your seam allowance all the way around. But remember, because I'm trying to preserve my beautiful embroidery, I'm trying to get away with as little as possible there, and then I go back to the normal seam allowance. So I end up with this. That's the other side. Now I know that loads of you are going to say, oh, why did you sew all the way down? I don't know, I prefer it with the seam going all the way down. So once we've done that, just pop it out, your curves. You want it to be concave now. And you're going to get your lining and you're going to push that out as well. Actually, before you do that, do snip in. If you have done this in normal fabric, and if you haven't actually, you do need to snip into your curves. Not too much though, you don't want to weaken it. And do press it. It is important to press it. And ideally use like a tailor's ham so you can get a nice curve on it. Otherwise the end of the ironing board is good as well. Right, so we're making it concave, and then we're getting our lining, so we put it right sides together. Very, very important. Right sides together. Now I'm spreading, so if my lining goes this way, I'm making the outer fabric go that way, exactly lining up that middle bit. Just check the length of everything, make sure everything lines up perfectly, just along the top. So we're just going to deal with along the top of the mask. Now what's important is whatever your seam allowance was before, so this line here, not the top of the channel, the lower one, you have to stick to that, because you're going to sew from here, mine's like a centimetre away, you're going to come down here, come along here, very carefully here. You can use a zipper foot if you want, but it does seem to be okay. I just like push my wire over a little bit. and you're going to stop here. Don't be tempted to go all the way around. We're not ready to do that yet. So I'm starting at the edge where it would go onto the ears. I'm going forwards and back to close off the seam. I'm the seam allowance that I was before there when I did the wire channel. So look, and now I'm meeting where the wire channel is. Okay, so I'm just going to go really slowly there because that's where my wire is folded back. Now, like I said, you can use a zipper foot here, but I have found that it is okay. So just follow and sew in the well of your stitch line that you did before. Make sure this at the top is distributed nicely. And just keep going until you end up on the other side where it goes onto the ear. Also, hopefully your fabrics are right sized together. Didn't talk about that, did I? So that's what we've done. That's the side where the wire is. Okay, and we've got that little channel going on there. Now I'm going to trim it back pretty close. Be really careful when you do this, and you don't have to do it. Pretty close to the edge of the outer edge of the channel. But like I said, you do it really carefully, or don't bother doing it at all if you're worried. Now if you want to do any understitching on this part, now is the time to do it. So you open it all out, so you open everything out, and then you push your seam allowance towards that lining. And if you're going to understitch it, then it has to be wider than the channel of the wire. But I'm not going to do that because I do this sort of decorative stitch afterwards. But if you want to do it, now is the time to do it. But you can only do it on the top edge. It will be really, really tricky to do it on the bottom edge afterwards. Because I'm not going to be understitching, I am going to take away some of the excess on the side, but look, I'm not going anywhere near where the wire finishes. So I'll do the same on the other side. I'll turn it over. Want to know where the wire finishes. Trim away some of that excess. Okay, and then that's that for now. So then we've got to look at the bottom. Now whichever way we pushed our seam allowance on the top, we want to do the same here. So this is the bottom of the mask and everything is inside out. We've got it right sized together, our fabric. We line up the center seam, put a pin in there, and then line everything else up along the bottom so it's ready to sew. So even though I'm very tempted to sew from this side, I don't recommend that you do. I recommend you sew from the other side because you want to make sure you capture that line there where you stitched your lining pocket. So sew all along the bottom of your mask. Right, you decide what you want to do along this bottom here, but you either need to snip into it because it is like a curve, okay? You either need to snip into it or you need to trim it back so that it lays nicely. Right, so when you've done that, we need to close off one of the ends. So it doesn't matter which ends you do, but just close off one of the ends. So I'm going to close off this end here, and I'll just do the same seam allowance coming down. So the usual thing, forwards and back. I'm only telling you this because I'm imagining there's some beginner sewers doing this. You experienced sewers, I know you know all about this. So I went backwards and forwards, straight down, and then backwards and forwards there. You don't want too much bulk here, so it is a good idea to trim it back a bit. Now I'm too scared to miter my edges because I've got like delicate fabric with embroidery and stuff. So you can miter it if your fabric's normal and strong, but I'm not. So now we've got this, okay? So when you've chopped off all your loose threads, you can turn it the right way round. So we've got an opening at one end, put your hand in. Now what I would say is make sure you go, oh, I wasn't even doing it, make sure you go so your hand is going close to the outer edge. Don't go in between the pocket. I'm not sure it make a difference, but anyway, don't do it. So we want to turn these corners, yeah? So I find if I fold the seam allowance and then push it, it should come out nicely. Do that for both sides, yeah? And then turn it out as you would like a, as you would a pillowcase, yeah? So I'm going to have a fiddle with my thing now, whilst I make it look all neat for you. So when you've turned it the right way round and given it a really good press, you will end up with this. Now we've still got an open end that needs to be stitched up. I've pressed the seam allowance in so it's ready for me to stitch up. Now when you've stitched up that end, you may be happy to just leave it like this, or you might want to run a top stitch all the way around it. Now if you do, remember you've got that wire there, so make sure you clear where the wire is. So I think 1/2 centimetre away would do that, but lots of you will probably object. But I quite like the look of it having a zigzag edge. I really don't know why actually. So I'm going to do a zigzag edge stitch, and I'll start where that opening is. So remember, if you like the look of it being like this and you don't want any top stitch or anything, simply close off here. Do a straight line stitch and close it. You can just do a straight edge, make sure you can just do a straight stitch coming along here, to close off that opening, and that will be fine for now. Now if you're going to go around the edge, so this is the top, then make sure you clear the wire. But I know you're going to shout at me, I like the look of a large zigzag stitch. So I'll make sure everything is pushed in, and then when I come to the wire, it's going on either side of that wire. So I've got to concentrate. And then be careful when it comes to the top of the nose. You've got to be a bit careful there because it's quite thick. So I could just use the wheel for that bit. And then come all the way along the bottom. We end up with that. That's the inside. I really think it looks like a bra. It's because of my zigzags, isn't it? But we're not done yet because we need to trap some elastic in here and fold it back. Now I know many of you are just putting elastic in each corner and then people tie it. But I've made so many of these now, like lots of you have. Well, more I've made and worn so many of them now, and I really find just that little bit of easing that occurs when you do a channel and have the elastic in there, just that little bit of easing that happens here at the side just gives me a much better fit. Now you can just use any elastic for this, yeah, like it, well, not any elastic, you want narrow elastic. My mask is going to be tied around the ears, so my elastic strips are, well, they just happen to be 28 centimeters, but I'm sure they don't have to be that. So I trap it inside, I fold it over. I mean, you can just make up loads and hem them and then thread it through with a safety pin or something. But I'm just going to trap mine in there and then on the other side as well. So they will be trapped in there, and you're just going to sew straight up there and straight there. Now, because this is going to be a little bit thick, isn't it? So just be careful and go backwards and forwards a couple of times, because that is a stress point there and it could easily come undone. So just sew straight along the edge, another thick bit, so squint, and backwards and forwards. So you're going to do that to the other side as well. So it's quite nice. It is quite nice, isn't it? So that's the inside. You've got your filter pockety bit, and then these you just tie loosely in a knot, and then that goes around the ear. But I think if I have to wear a mask, you know, I do want it to be really nice. So that's the adjustable wire bit there that will go around your nose, so it stops your glasses from fogging up. Thank you so much for watching. Now, if you prefer the pleated mask, we have got a full tutorial of how to make a copy of one of those disposable pleated masks, but using fabric. Thank you. See you again soon. Bye.